Hi, so welcome back to the Mind of the Writer. Today I have my very first interview with my guest, Susannah Rigg. And Susannah is a British journalist living in Mexico. She's lived in Mexico for some time. Her articles have been published in Conde Nast by the BBC, in The Independent, and other places as well. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of how widely her articles have been published. A couple of years ago, I was looking up online some history on my husband's hometown, which is in Michoacan. And I typed in the name of the town and up popped an article. And I thought, oh, this article is really interesting. And lo and behold, it was written by Susannah. So she's really widely published for her travels in Mexico. Susannah also offers a writing mentorship program online and in Mexico, based in Mexico. And she's also written a couple of novels. And because on this YouTube channel, we're looking at fiction writers and what's happening in the imagination and minds of fiction writers, we'll probably stick more with the novels than we will with the journalism, but it's all sort of part of the same, the same writing package. And then before I turn to Susannah, I just wanted to let you know that I met Susannah in 2015. I was researching altars for the Day of the Dead because I wanted to build one with my Spanish students, adult Spanish students. And it was July, but I thought I just wanted to practice. And so I was researching online. I stumbled on Susannah's website, Mexico Retold at the time, and got in touch with her. And then, through this Day of the Dead altar. And since then, we've been in touch sporadically. And she just seemed like a really great person to do a first interview with. And I would say that the connecting factor definitely is that we were both born in the UK. We both have had Mexico play a huge role in our lives. And we both write fiction. So this is why, I think that Susannah would be a great person to interview. So Susannah, welcome. And thank you for agreeing to be, I don't know if I should say my first victim, but my first person that I'm going to interview. And I'm just really, really happy that you've agreed.
Oh, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really looking forward to this talk with you.
I thought that we would begin by me asking you what drew you to Mexico, what led you to Mexico, and once you were there, why you stayed, and because your life is still there. It's 12, is it 12 years?
11 years.
11 years. So what made you stay in Mexico?
Okay, so I learned about the Aztecs when I was 10, who I now would refer to as the Mexica, but more widely known as the Aztec people. And I remember just seeing these pictures of Tenochtitlan, which is now modern day Mexico City, and thinking, I want to go there. And I think I thought I'd arrive and it would look like that, which in some way it actually, I found out does, like a lot of the structures are similar, but that's a whole nother story. And so it was always on my mind, Mexico. I go to Spain a lot because I'm from the UK and it was, an easy trip. And then finally, I came to Mexico in 2005 and lived with a family in Guadalajara. And they just embraced me like I was part of the family. I was the British daughter. And I'm not joking to say, as soon as I put my foot down on Mexican soil, I was like, oh, I'm home. And I can't really explain more of what that is, maybe past lives, who knows, all of these things we could say these things are. I have certain theories, but I just felt like I was home. And so I traveled around Mexico for about 4.5 months, went back to England, tried to kind of shoehorn Mexico into everything I was doing. I was studying for a master's and then a PhD in sociology of religion. And I was trying to kind of shoehorn Mexico in. I wrote about the 2012 Mayan calendar, for example, and the kind of impending potential end of the world was believed by many people who followed that calendar in the kind of new religious movement arena. And then my PhD, I just couldn't shoehorn it in. And eventually I was like, I've got to go. I've got to go to Mexico. So my intention was to come for 2 years. 11 years later, I'm still here. Why do I stay? Mexico does something, and I've heard this from so many people. It sort of grabs you by the soul and kind of keeps hold of you in this really beautiful way that it shows you magic all the time. And I don't want to over romanticize, because obviously, you know, Mexico is a complex country with all of its positives and negatives, but there's something just beautiful about Mexico. I'm always learning something new. Every state feels like a different country. It's just rich with stories, rich with magic. I don't really know how to say it differently, but and that's why I'm still here. And I have thought about leaving at times, and then I stay. And I'm very, very happy here.
And I felt that when I was in Mexico too. Like I felt the magic. So I completely, you know, understand what you're talking about. So as for your movement in Mexico, I know that you've lived in Mexico City and you're in Nayarit now. But so what's your sort of movement been in the country? Or you've, because of the journalism, you've been completely, you know, all the time traveling?
Well, I mean, I lived in Oaxaca for 6.5 years. That was my first spot. And then Mexico City. I think the London girl in me wanted the capital and the big city and, you know, finger on the pulse. And then actually I feel like I maybe should have gone a few years earlier, because by the time I got there, I wasn't that worried about the latest this, that and the other. I was more interested in quite a nice, easy life. Mexico City has its, you know, incredibleness, but I arrived and 2 weeks later we had the earthquake. And so that was quite a stark welcome, and a beautiful welcome in this weird way that everybody came together and everybody was helping each other within that, as tragedies do, you know. And then eventually I decided to come to live by the ocean, because I hadn't lived by the ocean before. And I decided Nayarit, something I think also because the Aztec people were nomadic, and they actually came from Nayarit, from this little island called Mezcaltitlan. And so there's something about that, about this link to the Aztec and where they began. But I've traveled all over. I think it's now 20, I've been to 26 of the 32 states from work and travel. Yeah. And still so much more to see. That's much more. And some of those states, you know, I've just touched a corner or one town, or every state has different food, different music, different culture. It's incredible. So still so much more. The northern states I'm missing. I haven't been to quite a few of those, so hopefully at some point I'll make it up to some of the northern states.
Well, it's amazing. It's an amazing life. So my next question is, and we're going to get into the psychology of writing a little bit, you know, not a little bit later, but soon. But I'm really interested to know what Mexico does to your imagination and to your writer's mind, how it supports it, maybe in a way that's very unique to Mexico. Because, you know, for me, my big serial novel is set in England, and I'm away from England. And I think that that's really key, because it's become this mythical place in my imagination. If I lived in England, I don't think I would be able to write that novel. I need the distance, I need the here ice, I need the missing and the nostalgia to do it. So I don't want to minimize the creative effect of other countries, but because of this mythical, magical thing that is sometimes hard to put a finger on in Mexico, but it's all around, how does that support your imagination in maybe a way that England wouldn't?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because actually what you said was really interesting about how now that you don't live in the UK, there's a nostalgia. And I mean, we've talked previously about nostalgia and how that's important for both of us in our work, or something we think about. So I'm not sure I can fully know how Mexico inspires my imagination, because it's my everyday life in a way. I do know, and that's one of the reasons why I've stayed, not the full reason, but if I were to leave, I know the longing for Mexico would be so strong. I'm not sure if I'm prepared to deal with that. And I know people that have experienced that. But when it becomes like your everyday life, it can be hard to know where it's inspiring you or not, because it's all in the same. But I would say that, you know, things like Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead, I've had experiences around that. And when I've told people, they're just like, oh yeah, you know, and if I said that to people in the UK, they'd be like, what are you talking about, that you feel like your dad was there? And, you know, it's much, things are much more accepted. Not you know, not everybody, but like in a more general sense, these kind of ideas of storytelling as well, I think, are quite rich, especially in places like Oaxaca. Oaxaca is like a rich storytelling place, and I feel like everywhere I go, there's quite a lot of mystery, because so many things, like I went recently to see these petroglyphs, and there's some understanding of what happened there, but there's also still a lot of mystery. And so that's where, as a storyteller, I get to sort of fill in the gaps. I get to imagine what it might have been like before, or going to archaeological sites and you're going there and it's not the colors that it would have been, you know, like Templo Mayor in Mexico City would have been like red and white and in the stucco, and so I'm imagining that, and I'm imagining what that would have been like to see that, like also for the Spanish when they arrived, to envisage that, and imagining the smells. And so all those things, I think, where there's pockets of places to add your story. And then in Mexico City, I feel like somebody said this to me. It was a designer that I met in Mexico City, and he'd lived in the UK. And he said in the UK, everything had been done before. So anything he suggested, it was like, oh, we've done that. We've tried that. In Mexico City, it's like, oh, yeah, let's try it. Because although it's a really old city, it's really kind of young and vibrant and kind of that naive, but it's not naive in a negative sense, but that naive sense of like, let's try that. Let's give that a go, because there isn't this sense of like, oh, we've done it all before. And so that allows for so much imagination and so much like experimentation, which I think is what is so much part of our creative life, right? If we get rid of that experimentation, our writing can become really staid. So I think in those ways, perhaps, I'm really glad you've asked me this question, because it's helped me think about it.
It's really interesting, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, not that long ago, I did a podcast with the two young women who were working with me on my novel, the editor and the marketer. And we were talking about the artistic mindset and how that artistic mindset can be used to solve problems in other areas of your life. And I think as you're talking, that artistic creative mindset, and I think in the podcast, I gave the example, if you're painting, you know, if one set of colors aren't working, well, then you can simply choose other colors. Or if you're dancing, there's this endless number of dance steps or choreography that you can do. The same with writing. And I think that artistic mindset, which is translated to problem solving in any area of your life, basically really melds with the Mexican way of thinking. And again, with my husband, Francisco, who's from a rural area, when he was growing up, he had to make do with using certain things to fix things that you know, the things that weren't meant to fix things, you know, pull something off this piece of equipment to fix something else. The limitation made him a very creative thinker. And so we do come from very different worlds, but I think one thing that we really rely on, or we really sort of align on, is the Mexican creative way of thinking with my artistic way of thinking put together. When we're presented with a problem, we try everything, but it's still that creative thinking, which is, to me, I'm not saying that other cultures don't have it. They do. I mean, I'm not Mexican, but definitely his Mexican way of thinking is in alignment with my artistic way of thinking. And just as you're saying, you know, as you're saying, all of these experimentation and creativity and for him it would be different because he's very mechanical. So, you know, often I've had pieces of cutlery missing from the kitchen drawers. They've been used to fix a carpet cleaning machine or something. You know, it's a different form of creativity, but it's the same thing. If I'm working with words and I'm like, okay, well, this set of words isn't working for me, I'm going to make up my own words, and we're going to turn some colors into verbs, and we're just going to mix it up. And that really goes well with the whole Mexican thing. Whereas I think maybe a traditional, if I think of my mentors in the past, you know, traditional Anglo mentors would say, well, no, you can't go making words up and changing all those grammatical rules. And whereas in the Mexican mindset, it's like, go for it. Everything's very, well, like you say, experimental.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah. I didn't think about, I mean, just as you were talking, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So, well, we can kind of shift into some of the questions that I sent you. When I read your newsletter, well, first of all, I don't know whether it's egotistical, but when I'm reading your newsletter, I'm thinking, that's what I think. I think the same thing, right? But I do feel when I read your newsletter, they really, you know, they resonate with me. And one thing that I've been looking at on this YouTube channel is this transitioning from the off-page world to the on-page world. Mm-hmm. And I still say fiction and reality because that's so ingrained in me, but I'm trying to change my language to reflect my mindset, because for me, the on-page world, when I'm in there, is very real. And I have disconnected from, you know, my domestic reality. So when I read a lot of your work, the newsletter mainly, I'm thinking, yes, Susannah has things that she's doing to, I want to say, ground yourself in your story or in your writing. So I think it's really interesting, because a lot of the things that you do and a lot of things that I do are physical things, but they're physical things that we're doing to get ourselves into the imagination, that more ethereal way of being. Mm-hmm. So I thought that I would like to start off by asking you, what are some of those things that you do to get yourself into the zone? I mean, this is a sort of a fiction-based channel, but you don't have to just talk about fiction, but what do you do to get into that place?
Yeah, I find this question so fascinating because it's something that I think about often and hence write about, you know, in the newsletter. And I think it's different for everybody. As you mentioned, I'm a writing mentor, and so I notice the differences for different people. But for me, ritual is really important. And I think it started because I was trying to juggle, or I was juggling, fiction and journalism. And they're two very, very different things. It's almost like I've been describing it recently as like I step into journalist Susannah, and then I step out of that and have to step into novelist Susannah or you know, fiction writer Susannah. And it's actually really hard to just flip between the two. It's not so easy for me as like, oh, just be writing an article and then switch to writing fiction. And so I've by necessity had to create these kind of rituals for myself. And I work with a lot of people who it's the same thing. You know, they have day jobs and they're writing fiction, etc. And so they can be little things for me, including working, like clearing my desk. So like after finishing an article, the desk is cleared and then things get put on the desk that are novel writing things. And they tend to be more like things that bring me joy, shells or stones or nice crystals, things that kind of bring that kind of childlike sense to life. I really prescribe to a lot of Julia Cameron's teachings, or I don't know if she would call them teachings, maybe she would, around creativity. She's the woman who wrote The Artist's Way, and she talks a lot about this childlike sense, that really our creative self is childlike. And so to make myself as happy as possible, you know, when I'm seeing these things, it kind of brings that sense alive, which allows for that creativity. I will do things like before and after writing, dancing. I love to dance, and I do something that's called ecstatic dance, and that has kind of moved into my creative practice as well, of like literally just putting on my favorite song and just dancing before I write, and then dancing after I write. And often if I'm writing something incredibly something challenging, or a scene that maybe stirs up my emotions, I will shake after I've written. So I just stand on the spot and shake my body, just to move that emotion through. And that's something that I offer to a lot of my clients who work in on memoir, because memoir is, you know, you're bringing up all sorts of these emotions that perhaps you haven't touched on for a long time. So the more that you can create these boundaries, I mentioned in one of my newsletters, you know, showering and imagining the kind of words just like moving off you with the water and going down the plug, to just allow you that distinction, shutting a notebook and saying, I'm done now, and I'll come back to you, so it doesn't drag into your day. And then on the other hand, you want it to drag into your day sometimes, right? So it's like, it's nice when it does, because the subconscious is then working out plot holes and all of that stuff. So depending on what you need. But yeah, for me, lighting a candle also, I mean, probably the best thing that's happened to me is that I write with the London Writers Salon, which is an online, essentially a Zoom call with 200 odd people sometimes. And there's 4 hours in the day that they have these sessions, and you come on, you set your intention about what you're going to write, and you write for an hour together, but in silence. And it has created the container for which my writing can sit. And this, I also feel, is really important for writers and for our kind of writerly muse, or however we want to see it, that it knows it's got a place to land. Because when it doesn't, I think that's when it can just be a little bit scattered, and it can follow us around in that negative way, you know, that feeling when the story is nagging at you, going, why haven't you written me? Why haven't you written me? And then, but if you know that every day at 10 a.m. or 8 a.m. or whatever it is, you're sitting down to write, I feel like the story can relax into that space. And we may come on to this later, but it's something that I consider a devotion as opposed to a dedication. It's I'm devoted to my practice, and that has changed the way I look at things and seen it as like a devotional practice. So yeah.
I mean, I agree with that. And I'm just thinking, as I'm listening, we should just backtrack slightly, and I should get you to talk about, or at least to do, you know, a small description of what each of your novels is, because I know the title, this is it Saba? Is that the name of the tree? The Saba tree?
The Saber Tree, yeah.
The Saba tree is the first one, and then the second one, I know that you said it was set in modern Mexico in 2017, but maybe a little bit about those and what stages they're at, or plans that you have for them.
Sure. Yeah, so I started writing fiction. Well, the first idea came for me for a book in 2012, The Saber Tree, when I was traveling in Chiapas. And it's set in 1950s Chiapas in the jungle, the Lacandon jungle. And it's a story of when missionaries arrived to the area. A story of a young Lacandon girl and her belief that she brought a curse onto the village, which caused an outbreak of yellow fever. And then the missionaries arrive, and she's pretty susceptible for believing that she's the problem, and so her sins can be forgiven through the arrival of missionaries and Christianity. And it kind of comes from my religious studies background, and also my kind of my struggle, I guess, with missionary work and what that can, just the complexities that can bring, looking at that. And that's in a cupboard. I am actually currently rereading it, having a little look at it, and considering changing POVs and various things. And the second novel is set in Mexico City in 2017 when we had the earthquake. It's a story of a young, well, not so young, but of a British woman who marries into a Mexican family and finds herself in unexpected competition with her mother-in-law. And then when the earthquake strikes, their apartment becomes uninhabitable, and her and her husband have to move in with the in-laws, and it's sort of everything that unfolds from there. So they're my two stories, and currently I'm writing a lot of short stories. So really, really enjoying delving into kind of short fiction after being so immersed in novels for so long.
We're going to touch on this a little bit later, because for me it's really important. It took me a while to get my mind around this. I have two unpublished novels as well, and they are also, well, I don't know, one's in a box in the basement, one's in a box behind the piano, but they're in boxes. That's where they are. And then of course the third one, because I didn't want it to be in a box, I decided I was going to write the thing in public on the website, and now it's on Patreon. But I always felt before, I can't call myself an author unless I've been published, by this is my former thinking. I don't think like this anymore. Until I've been recognized or it's been published in that traditional way. But now I don't think that anymore. I think if you do it, you are it, and because when you're writing these things, it's a labor of love, or it is a labor of love for me. And this I do want to touch on a little bit later, but you're doing it and you're not getting paid for it. There's so many things that we do in life that we don't get paid for, and we are it. I'm a runner. I'm a mother. I'm a sister. I am a cook, and I'm a writer, and I'm an author. And so now, I've completely changed my attitude about that. And I think that that's something that's really important to me on my YouTube channel, is that I'm not talking to people who, or maybe some, but it's not just authors published in a traditional sense, because that's not the norm anymore. There's so many creative ways to get your work out. And then me, as the person asking the questions, well, I don't have a novel published in a traditional way. And I feel that even though I have those two stories in boxes, I feel that they've given me a lot. And I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later, but because I know you think this, I know that you think the same about your novels as well. So when you're doing these rituals, you kind of see the rituals around entering that on-page world and coming out of it as quite similar. It's the dance, it's the closing the book. Is there anything else that you can think of that you do to sort of put the story away? Because this is something that I think about a lot. It's hard for me. I think it's been a challenge for me to put the story away when I've finished. So for you,
when you finish writing for the day,
yeah, it stays with me. That subconscious thing is really strong, yeah.
And I actually generally, unless it's something particularly emotionally charged where I just need to shake it off, I love the subconscious drag of novels, because actually I think that's one of the reasons why I love to write. Because, for example, I don't know if you do yoga, but at the end of yoga, Shavasana, corpse pose, and you're just lying there, and often, and your mind's supposed to be blank, and mine invariably is thinking about dinner or something. But if I'm writing a novel, it's thinking about plot points. And I'll suddenly like, oh, they're going to go here and they're going to do that. Brilliant. And all the places where my mind might have got caught in kind of, you know, anxious thinking about something, or, you know, wondering, worrying, all these things, it gets taken up with novels, plot lines. And so to me, that's the joy of writing. It's almost like really great for your mental health, because, you know, you're, rather than worrying about whatever it is you're worrying about, you're thinking about stories and plot lines and characters and what they might say or what they might be doing, and those kind of things. So to me, that's actually part of the joy. And so I almost wouldn't want to get rid of that. I do understand, though, there are times when, you know, you need to be with other people, and sometimes you can't always, if that's still going on in your head and you're trying to have a conversation with somebody about something entirely different, that can be tricky. But generally there seems to be a cutoff for me, that it's in those moments where I might daydream, I might wander off thinking about something, that the subconscious will kick in. And to me, that's actually when a lot of the story gets worked out. I wrote a newsletter about this, around how I don't believe that sitting at your computer trying to wrestle through a plot issue is the best idea. For some people it maybe is, but for me that's never worked. It's never worked with anything. With article writing too, in journalism, I will often have interviewed everybody, done everything I have to do, and usually I wait a couple of days as it's working out in my subconscious which bits are important and how I'm going to start the story, and it will come to me when I'm doing the washing up, or, you know, when I'm cooking dinner. And the same with novels. So I had a plot issue with my most recent novel, and I remember I went and sat on the sofa and I started reading another book, and something in this other book just clicked, of like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. And so I was having a really nice time reading a book, and then the story got sorted out, and I wasn't just sat there at my computer trying to work it out. So that to me is, where the subconscious, to me, it's, I almost wouldn't want to shut it off. That's the joy.
And I completely relate to that as well, because often, and I think we'll get into this in a moment, but I'll hear bits of conversations in my head, and things will come to me, but it's not when I'm at the computer. It's when I'm doing something completely different. And sometimes, if I'm able, I get to somewhere where I can write it down quick before I lose it, but it's not coming to me in that kind of writing, you know, in that where you would think at the computer, or sitting with a pen in my hand. Mm-hmm. So I think what I'd like to do, and this again is for my tech things, and I know that we're being recorded, so for those of you watching, I'm going to be doing this, you're hearing me think aloud. I want to actually stop the video here, mm-hmm. and then I want to start another one for the, you know, for a different YouTube video, just because it's very long, and the videos tend to be a little bit shorter. So you're okay with that, Susannah? Okay. So I'm just going to stop recording, and then I will start, just to make things really confusing.